But Nate, I want to ask you about another topic relating to president and getting some pushback concerning the Kennedy Center. Of course, a federal court ruling last week against the president's attempt to rename. So what is the latest development on this?
Yeah, the president being told he's got 20 days, or rather the Kennedy Center has 20 days to take his name off the side of the building. You've all seen the photos and videos that his name was inserted above John F. Kennedy's name. The judge, the ruling last week that they have to remove that name, as it was Congress, not the Kennedy Center's board, that initially set the name of the institution. That institution does receive federal funds. And so for all of those reasons, President Trump's name is not on there legally, at least according to that federal judge. Now, President Trump hitting back quite strongly on Truth Social, apparently backing down. I want to read a portion of this Truth Social message for you here, Steph. He said, quote, "We are going to be working with Congress to transfer this failing institution back to them so they can make a determination about what to do with it." He continues, quote, "Unless I am free to do what I do better than anyone else, bring this institution back physically, financially, and artistically."
What's happening, people? Welcome to Jack Mockler again. Trump has spent his life treating his name as his most valuable asset, branding everything from towers to stakes. So when he saw the chance to rename the Kennedy Center after himself, he seized it, imagining a permanent monument to his legacy that tourists and school children would see for generations. But the move would soon backfire, except it wasn't meant to be, because a federal judge looked at what the administration was trying to do and said, "No, you can't do that. That's illegal." And then the judge ordered Trump's name removed from the building, and it actually happened. Let that sink in for a moment. A federal judge said no to Trump, and Trump actually had to comply. The name actually came down. In the middle of the night, under cover of darkness, covered in massive tarps so nobody could see what was happening, workers climbed up on scaffolding 6 or 7 stories high and physically removed Donald Trump's name from one of the most famous buildings in America.
I have no interest in continuing what could be only a hopeless journey into never, never land. So President Trump backing down here, a rare instance of the president backing down after a federal judge ruled against him. Remains to be seen just how much more this would go through the courts if this is something that could make it all the way to the Supreme Court. This lawsuit, by the way, brought in part by Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, the Democrat from Ohio. She is a member of the Kennedy Center board, an ex officio member of the board because she serves in Congress. She sued the Kennedy Center and the Trump administration for making that choice to change the organization's name to the Donald J. Trump and John F. Kennedy Center last year. Again, that lawsuit appears to have been effective for now. A lot of questions about whether President Trump will continue with this posture of backing off the Kennedy Center or if he will try to make yet another play to take over that institution. This is also notable, Steph, because the Kennedy Center was actually supposed to shut down for a 2-year renovation quite soon. The Kennedy Center board now has to possibly reconsider that decision as well as part of this latest ruling.
They stripped it off the facade and threw it away. Gone. Just like that. And when people gathered outside and realized what was happening, they absolutely lost their minds. Some were furious, shouting at the workers, calling them cowards, accusing them of hiding something. Others were cheering, celebrating what they saw as a victory for the rule of law. It was chaos. It was anger. It was jubilation. All mixed together in this wild scene outside the Kennedy Center as Trump's name disappeared from the building. And the whole thing happened because a judge said that renaming the Kennedy Center after Trump violated federal law.
The deadline just expired at noon Eastern for the Trump administration to remove the president's name from the Kennedy Center. And the Justice Department says all Trump signage is now gone. So let's take a live look right now at the center. It comes after a federal judge granted an extension last night after thunderstorms rolled through D.C. Workers had started the process yesterday behind a white tarp. And ABC's Stephen Portnoy joins us now with more. So, Stephen, take us through this back and forth that we saw over removing the president's name.
And Rhiannon, we're still waiting to see for ourselves what administration officials have said in a court filing that the president's name has in fact been removed from the facade of the building. At 11 o'clock this morning, an hour before the latest deadline set by a federal judge here in Washington, the update came that behind that tarp that's now in front of the Kennedy Center, workers have taken down the president's name from all physical signage of the building and grounds. The original deadline set by the judge was yesterday, set by Judge Christopher Cooper 2 weeks ago. And Cooper determined then in a lawsuit brought by Ohio Democratic Congresswoman and Kennedy Center board member Joyce Beatty
that the Kennedy Center was created by Congress to honor John F. Kennedy, and only Congress can change that. Not Trump, not his hand-picked board, not his administration. Congress. And since Congress never voted to rename the building, the name change was illegal from the start. So the name had to come down. This isn't some random building we're talking about. This is the Kennedy Center. This is where presidents go. This is where ambassadors bring visiting dignitaries. This is where the nation's cultural elite gather for performances and celebrations. This is one of the most prestigious institutions in Washington, and Trump's name was literally plastered all over it. They renamed the whole thing after him. The Trump Kennedy Center. That's what it said on the building. That's what was on the website. That's what was in all the official materials.
That Congress named the Performing Arts Center after John F. Kennedy, and only Congress can change the name. The judge also ruled that the Kennedy Center's board needed to take a closer look at the plans to renovate it before those plans moved forward, saying that the trustees essentially failed in their duties by essentially rubber stamping the plans to close and move forward with the renovation. Now, that was the judge's order 2 weeks ago, and President Trump seemed resigned to accepting it. His name came off the website and off Kennedy Center emails until just this past Thursday, just 2 days ago, when the Kennedy Center's board voted to appeal Judge Cooper's order. So by yesterday afternoon, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals got a filing from the Justice Department that very much read like a Trump social media post. It had officials calling Congresswoman Beatty a troublemaker, and it made a claim that President Trump's name should be up there next to John F. Kennedy as a demonstration of, quote, two great presidents, one Republican, one Democrat, working together in many ways.
But now it's gone, stripped away by court order. A federal judge said the renaming was illegal and ordered it all removed. And now here we are watching Trump's name get physically taken down from one of America's most iconic landmarks in what can only be described as a midnight takedown covered in tarps while crowds outside go absolutely ballistic. This is the story that shows you Trump doesn't actually get to just claim things for himself. He doesn't get to just put his name on whatever he wants. There are still laws, there are still judges, and sometimes those judges actually enforce those laws even when the president throws a tantrum about it. Here's the thing about this story that makes it so significant right now and why we need to pay attention to it. We live in a time when everything feels like it's become totally partisan and gridlocked.
A bipartisan relationship. The appeals court rejected that request for a stay, and here we are.
And here we are. So have we heard from President Trump about the future of the renovations at the Kennedy Center?
Well, the initial response from the president 2 weeks ago was to basically indicate that he would be walking away from the renovation and leaving it to lawmakers to figure it all out. But late last week on Air Force One, the president told reporters that he's been asked, as he put it, in the strongest of language, to stay involved with the Kennedy Center. On June 5th, last week, he said he's considering that and would take a look at other ways to revitalize the facility given the judge's ruling. Under Judge Cooper's order, which is still being appealed, the center is not supposed to close next month. Its programming calendar, Rhiannon, drops off a cliff after July 3rd. Staffers of the Kennedy Center, of the National Symphony Orchestra, are basically all in limbo right now. The Washington National Opera is suing, claiming the Kennedy Center owes that company millions of dollars. So it's very much unclear what's going to happen next. But what we seem to be able to say today is that it's no longer the Trump Kennedy Center. Rhiannon.
All right. Still a lot of questions, and we'll have to keep watching this. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Like nothing ever actually gets enforced anymore because everyone just appeals everything and fights everything, and the courts get clogged with cases and motions and delays, and nothing ever actually reaches a resolution. People file appeals and emergency motions and stay requests, and it just goes on forever. But this time, something actually did happen. A judge made a ruling. The Trump administration fought it hard. They begged the appeals court to stop it. The appeals court refused to save them. And then workers actually went up there and removed the name from the building. It actually physically came down off the facade. You could watch it happen on videos. People were outside taking recordings. News crews were covering it live. And the name is gone. It's not there anymore. Trump lost and had to accept it. That's rare. That's very rare. That's significant. That's the kind of concrete thing that actually matters because it shows that there are still limits in this country. There are still actual consequences for breaking the law. You can't just rename national institutions after yourself and expect to get away with it forever without consequences. Eventually, a judge says no and means it, and makes you take it off, and then it actually comes off. Whether you like it or not, whether you want to appeal or not, it's gone. Let's understand how we got to this moment where Trump's name was being stripped off the Kennedy Center in the middle of the night. First of all, you got to understand that renaming the Kennedy Center after Trump was controversial from day one. Like, from the moment they announced it, people lost their minds. Artists spoke out publicly. Famous musicians said they wouldn't perform there anymore. Actors and actresses who had performed at the Kennedy Center for decades said they opposed the renaming. Democrats in Congress spoke out forcefully. Cultural organizations sent letters opposing it. This wasn't some quiet thing that slipped by. This was huge. People understood what it meant because the Kennedy Center is named after John F. Kennedy. It was established in his honor. It was literally created by an act of Congress as a tribute to JFK's contributions to the arts and culture in America. JFK believed in the arts. He championed artists. He brought culture to the White House. So Congress created this institution in his memory. It was supposed to be his legacy, his tribute. In the founding statute, the law that created the whole thing explicitly states that the Kennedy Center is to honor President Kennedy and cannot be given any other official name or public tribute without an act of Congress. That's what the law says. That's in the statute. There's no ambiguity there. There's no wiggle room. It's crystal clear. But the Trump administration and the Kennedy Center board decided they didn't care about that. They decided to rename it anyway. They decided to call it the Trump Kennedy Center. Maybe they thought no one would challenge it. Maybe they thought they could just do it and people would get used to it over time. Maybe they were arrogant enough to believe that putting Trump's name on something iconic would somehow boost his legacy, or make people respect him more, or elevate his standing in history. But they were wrong about all of it because someone sued. Someone challenged the renaming in court. The case went to federal court in Washington, D.C., and the judge listened to all the arguments from both sides. He listened to Trump's people argue that renaming was fine and within the board's authority. He listened to the other side argue passionately that it violated federal law and the founding statute. He read the legal briefs. He reviewed the statute carefully. He looked at the founding documents of the Kennedy Center. He understood the legislative intent. And when he issued his ruling, it was crystal clear and it was based on something very specific. He said the board exceeded its authority. He said renaming the building violated the founding statute. He said the law is very explicit that the Kennedy Center is supposed to honor President Kennedy and that you can't just change the name whenever you want without an act of Congress. And he cited the actual language from the statute. The Kennedy Center was created by Congress as a living memorial to President John F. Kennedy. That was the whole point. That was why it was built. That was the purpose. And the statute says very clearly that the center is to honor President Kennedy and cannot be given any other official name or public tribute without an act of Congress. That means you need Congress. You need a vote. You need a law passed. You can't just have the board decide on a Tuesday afternoon that we're renaming this after Trump. That's not how the law works. The founding statute doesn't allow it. It's explicit. It's clear. There's no wiggle room. So the judge's ruling said the administration broke the law. The board broke the law. Renaming it violated federal statute. So he ordered the Trump administration and the Kennedy Center to take down all the physical signs, remove Trump's name from the website, strip it from official materials, and make the building compliant with the law within 2 weeks. That's what the judge gave them. Remove his name in 2 weeks or be in contempt of court, violate a federal judge's order, and face contempt charges. Now, you think the Trump administration would just accept the ruling and move on? You think they say, okay, the judge ruled against us, so we'll comply with the law? That's what normal people do when a judge rules against them. That's what people who respect the legal system do. But Trump doesn't do that. Trump never accepts a loss. Trump fights. Trump appeals everything. Trump asks for stays and emergency orders and anything else he can think of to delay or to get around the ruling. Trump's position is always appeal, delay, fight, never accept. So his team goes to the appeals court. They file an emergency petition arguing that the judge's order should be paused while they continue to fight it. They file all these legal arguments. They argue that Trump's name on the building is good for fundraising and that removing it would hurt the Kennedy Center's ability to raise money from donors. They're literally arguing that branding the building after Trump is worth more than actually following federal law. They're saying the judge got it wrong, and the appeals court should stop the removal from happening. They're arguing that the Kennedy Center needs to keep Trump's name because it helps with donations. They're begging, literally begging for the court to grant them a stay, to pause the order, to keep Trump's name on the building while the legal fighting continues. They're saying this is emergency, urgent. We need immediate relief. But the appeals court says no. The panel looks at the emergency petition and says no, we're not going to stop this order. The law is clear. The judge was right. The Trump administration needs to comply. And they deny the petition. They basically slap down the emergency request and say the removal can go forward. And at that point, the Trump administration knows they're out of options. They fought and they've lost. The Supreme Court could theoretically get involved, but nobody's expecting that. This is a pretty clear-cut case about statutory language. There's no constitutional issue. There's nothing that would make the Supreme Court want to take it up. So they know they've got to take Trump's name off the building, and they know the deadline is coming. They're supposed to get it done within the time the judge gave them. But then the deadline arrives, and suddenly there are thunderstorms in Washington, D.C. Thunderstorms are blowing through, and the Trump administration asked for a brief extension because of the weather. They're like, we can't take the name off in this thunderstorm because it's dangerous for workers or because the weather's interfering with the operation. So the judge, being reasonable, gives them a brief extension. He says, okay, but you need to get this done immediately when the weather clears. And then on the early morning hours after the deadline, as the sun's coming up, that's when the workers finally start the removal. And here's where it gets really dramatic and really significant. They don't just quietly take the letters off during regular business hours with minimal attention, like some routine maintenance. They erect this massive scaffolding that goes 6 or 7 stories high around the building. It's obvious it's huge. Everyone in D.C. can see it. Construction crews setting up equipment being brought in. Then they cover the entire operation in tarps, industrial tarps. They cover everything up so people can't see what's happening inside. So people can't see the workers taking down the letters. So people can't watch Trump's name physically disappear from the building in real time. It's this deliberate effort to block the view, which of course just makes more people curious and more people show up to see what's going on. That's when people start to realize something's actually going down, and they gather. Hundreds of people gather outside the Kennedy Center. They stand there watching this tarped-off operation. They're watching the scaffolding. They're filming on their phones. They're talking to reporters. They're waiting to see what happens. Some of them have signs. Some of them brought chairs. And as time goes on and they realize what's actually happening, that Trump's name is being stripped off the building behind those tarps, people start to lose their minds. They start chanting. They start yelling at the workers. They're shouting cover up and cowards like the workers are trying to hide some dirty secret instead of just following a court order to comply with federal law. One protester told reporters they're hiding what they're doing and they know this is wrong. But it wasn't just angry protesters. There were also people celebrating, people cheering, people waving American flags and holding signs that said things like justice served and rule of law matters. The scene was chaotic, divided, emotional. People on both sides of the issue showing up to witness what felt like a historic moment. The workers inside that scaffolding, covered by tarps, continuing their work despite the commotion below. They were just doing their jobs. They weren't making political statements. They weren't taking sides. They were following a court order. They were doing what the law required. And as they removed each letter, as Trump's name disappeared piece by piece, the crowd outside reacted. Some booed. Some cheered. Some just watched in stunned silence, trying to process what they were witnessing. The name that Trump had fought so hard to put up there was coming down, and there was nothing he could do about it. His lawyers had tried. His administration had tried. They had fought it in court, appealed to higher courts, asked for extensions, tried everything they could think of to stop this moment from happening. But the law was clear, and the judge was firm, and the name came down. This whole situation reveals what the real fight is about at its core. Trump's administration tried to argue that renaming the Kennedy Center after Trump was good for fundraising and institutional benefit, that it would attract major donors, that having Trump's name on it would help them raise money, that removing his name would hurt the Kennedy Center financially and damage their ability to fund programming. But the judge didn't buy that argument. He heard them out, and then he rejected it completely. He said the Kennedy Center belongs to the American people, not to Trump. He said it was established by Congress to honor John F. Kennedy as a lasting tribute to his life and his vision for the arts in America. He said that Congress, not the president, not the board, not Trump personally, gets to decide what the building is named after and what it represents. He said the founding statute is absolutely clear about this and leaves no room for interpretation. And then he enforced that law. He made the building comply with the statute even though it went against what Trump wanted, even though it meant stripping his name off. So what this story really shows at its heart is that judges still have power, that there are still real laws that actually matter and get enforced, that you can't just rename national institutions after yourself and expect to keep getting away with it forever without legal consequences. Sometimes a judge says no and actually makes it stick. And when that happens, you have to comply. Even if you're the president of the United States, even if you have unlimited money for lawyers and legal teams, even if you throw a tantrum and beg the appeals court for help and emergency relief, if the law is clear and the judge is firm and has statutory backing, you lose and your name comes down. Your branding gets stripped away. Your attempt to claim a national institution fails. That's what happened here. That's the reality that Trump had to confront as he watched his name disappear from the Kennedy Center. And that reality is significant because it shows that there are still limits in this country. There are still consequences for breaking the law. You can't just do whatever you want because you're the president. The courts still have power. The law still matters. And sometimes, just sometimes, when a judge says no, they actually mean it and make it stick. Removing Trump's name from the Kennedy Center is a physical, concrete, visible removal of his branding from a national institution. It's different from a court ruling about something abstract. You can't see most court rulings, but this one you can see. His name physically disappears from the building. Workers take it down. It goes into the trash. And everyone in Washington sees it happen. They watch it happen. They gather around to watch his name come off. That's powerful symbolically. That's the kind of thing that sticks in people's minds. Trump didn't get to keep his name on the Kennedy Center. Trump didn't get to claim this iconic building as his own personal brand. A judge said no and enforced it, and Trump's name came down. There's been all this talk for years about impeachment, about the 25th Amendment, about removing Trump from office over various things he said or done. There have been calls from Democratic leaders and even some Republicans at various points. There was talk about impeachment after he called for violence on January 6th. There's been talk about impeachment over his threats to wipe out entire civilizations over foreign policy disputes. There's been talk about the 25th Amendment over questions about his fitness. But those things never actually happen because Republicans control the Senate, or Trump has enough support that removal fails. Trump stays in power. But his name coming off the Kennedy Center, that's an actual removal. That's something that actually happened. That's concrete. That's real. That's enforceable. That's a judge ordering something and it actually getting done. And I think that resonates with people because they see it as a rare moment where Trump actually gets held accountable for something specific and concrete, where a judge says no and makes it stick. Now, you might be wondering why we should care about the name on the Kennedy Center when there are so many bigger issues going on in the country. Why focus on a building's name when there are constitutional crises and threats of violence and all these massive scandals happening every single day? Why spend time talking about Trump's name coming off a building when there's so much other stuff going on? And that's a fair question. That's a real question. But here's the thing. The name on the Kennedy Center matters symbolically because it shows that there are still limits. There are still consequences. You can't just do whatever you want if you're president. You can't just rename national buildings after yourself on a whim. You can't just defy a court order and expect to keep getting away with it forever. Sometimes a judge says no and makes it stick. Sometimes your name comes down. And that's important. That matters because if there are no consequences for anything, if Trump can just do whatever he wants and ignore court orders and defy judges without any repercussions at all, then what's the point of the courts? What's the point of the law? What's the point of Congress? What's the point of having any checks and balances in the government if the president can just do whatever he wants and nobody can stop him? The Kennedy Center name removal is a small but real moment where the law actually won, where a judge actually enforced what the law says, where Trump actually had to comply with an order he didn't like and didn't want to follow. And that matters. That tells you something about how the country still works, even when it feels completely broken sometimes. It tells you there are still limits. There are still judges who will enforce the law. And sometimes, just sometimes, those judges actually make it stick. They actually get compliance. They actually force someone powerful to do what the law says. Then the person who loses has to live with it, has to watch his name come down in front of crowds and cameras and reporters. And that's the real story. That's why this matters, because it shows you that the system isn't completely broken yet. The courts still have power. Judges still matter. And sometimes when they rule, their ruling actually means something. It actually changes something. It actually removes something. And in this case, it removed Trump's name from one of the most iconic buildings in America. And nobody could stop it. And everyone watched it happen. And Trump had to accept it. Think about the broader implications of this moment. If a judge can force Trump to remove his name from a building, what else can a judge force him to do? If the courts can enforce the law on something as visible as the Kennedy Center, what else can they enforce? The answer is that they can enforce everything. They can enforce every law, every statute, every constitutional provision that Trump might try to ignore or violate. The only question is whether they have the will to do it. And in this case, they did. Judge Cooper had the will. The appeals court had the will. They looked at the law. They looked at what Trump was trying to do, and they said no. That's significant. That's a precedent. That's a signal to Trump and to future presidents that the courts are still watching, that the law still matters, that you can't just do whatever you want. You have to follow the rules like everyone else. And when you don't, there are consequences. A judge ordered Trump's name removed from the Kennedy Center after he tried to claim it without legal authority, and workers physically took it down. A visible, symbolic consequence showing the president can be stopped. The moment stands as a reminder that democratic institutions can still check executive power, and the rule of law can prevail even against the most powerful person in the country.